Welcome everyone to a training session on research culture delivered by the PRISM network. My name is Rika Nair and my current role is as Research Culture Manager at the University of Warwick. I'm also the lead of the Research Culture Enablers Network. I'm really excited to share with you some of the developments taking place in the wide-reaching and impactful area of research culture. The training will have the following structure. I'll first give an overview of the key milestones that have given research culture as a topic, the necessary critical mass to become visible on agendas of even the highest level of research leadership. I hope by the end of this section you will have a better grasp of why we are talking about research culture now, some of the key definitions being used, and some of the initiatives taking place. In the second part of the training, I will delve into more personal aspects of how I got into research culture work, what a typical day looks like working to support institutional research culture. Research culture at its heart is about lived experience of research, which is why any of us can become experts. The third section of this training has been designed to help you reflect on what research culture looks like for you and to connect with other PRISMs to think about how research culture, as we currently live in it, impacts PRISMs. We would also like you to flip this narrative and think about ways PRISMs can play an active role in changing research culture for the better. To provide some context to research culture, it's important to consider there have been at least 3 separate movements to improve the UK research landscape, which have now converged into the broader topic of research culture. These 3 to me have been the most influential, and they are firstly, talent or risks to a sustainable research pipeline, integrity and more specifically the reproducibility crisis, and thirdly, a well-being crisis where a lack of psychological safety in research environments means that our workforce can't deliver the best research. The first image comes from the Royal Society's Securing the Scientific Century report, and it's a great illustration of an issue that's commonly referred to as the leaky pipeline. You can see that this was already a risk, being acknowledged as early as 2010, but what analysis from the Royal Society showed was that the UK was training up researchers to PhD level and then progressively losing them as we moved up the academic ranks. If you looked deeper into the data, it was worrying that this effect was even more pronounced for women and those from minority backgrounds. The second area of concern was around integrity and specifically a growing reproducibility crisis. This problem is still here today and likely to be made worse by AI. In fact, in 2023, over 10,000 papers were retracted. The main impact of falsified results is that published data no longer becomes reliable, and other researchers waste resources and time trying to base their own research on wrong information. In addition, in our publish or perish culture, those who falsify data are able to get to the highest impact journals and are rewarded, some of them with very prestigious and lucrative careers. So Attraction Watch is a bit like a gossip magazine for research, where you can see who is being found out to have falsified research, and they tally up the largest numbers of retractions. The lack of rigor in research happens at the highest levels and, for example, has resulted in very senior leaders losing their jobs, for example, the president of Stanford last year. Finally, another alarm being sounded in the sector was on the topic of researcher well-being. So anyone who's been a PhD student or interacted with PhD students will be acutely aware of risks to mental health in these groups, from isolation, imposter syndrome, workload and other pressures. Beyond this, the Wellcome Trust has been leading in the sector in capturing evidence of the prevalence of bullying and harassment in research contexts. So in my opinion, these were the 3 main concerns around how research was conducted in the UK, and they were gaining momentum until 2020, when the UK government published an influential R&D People and Culture strategy. I've provided a timeline here with some of the key initiatives that took place in the lead up to this report, with the specific areas that they relate to. I think the R&D People and Culture strategy was a milestone in giving visibility to research culture as a topic. I've copied in parts of the report and you can see that research culture is explicitly referred to, and the table makes it clear that from the government's perspective, the status quo was not acceptable. In order to support the UK's continued success in R&D on a global stage, we needed to make our research environments more inclusive to attract and retain the best talent. You can see in the pyramid that the government made a commitment to support this vision with necessary policy interventions. Certainly, a few years later, a decision to include research culture in REF as part of the People, Culture and Environment section with a possible weighting of 25% was seen as great at getting the attention of senior research leaders in higher education institutions. I've tried to set some context as to how we came to be talking about research culture, but pinning down exactly what research culture is remains difficult. And I don't think this is necessarily a problem because research culture will vary depending on the nature of the communities we are considering. The most commonly used definition comes from the Royal Society, and I think it's a good one to start with because it is broad enough and reveals the scale of research culture. So they say that research culture covers the behaviors, values, expectations, attitudes, and norms of our research communities. It's everything that influences the way research is conducted and communicated. So essentially, I would summarize that by saying research culture is not about research itself, but about everything around it that impacts the quality of research and those who work in research. I've chosen to include a passage from the Wellcome Trust report, which I think reflects the richness of research culture. What makes research culture special is that those involved in research often see it as a vocation. This means that the highs of research are amplified, but so are the lows. Failure in research is very personal and can magnify feelings of imposter syndrome. In addition, research is very varied, so research culture will be different depending on the research group, discipline, institution, or even country. The Wellcome Trust are also very keen to address inequalities in research culture, recognizing that underrepresented groups experience the most challenges. So if we think about any research culture issue, such as imposter syndrome, this will have an even greater impact on someone who is already feeling othered because of other characteristics. Research culture issues span across the research ecosystem, and here I've listed some of the key stakeholders involved in changing research culture. You can click on any of these logos to find out more about the work they're doing. A key theme is the need to move away from our current power structures, where research is seen as something done by lone geniuses, towards a more collaborative model of leadership. One way of assessing the health of research culture is through surveys. Here I've provided 3 UK surveys looking at different populations within our research ecosystem. You can see from the first one that a key message from PhD students is that support for well-being is insufficient. They would like to see a research culture change where supervisors are invested in developing not just the research project, but the person carrying out the project too. The second survey was conducted by ARMA, who advocate for research managers and administrators. Having lived experience as PRISMs, I'm sure we can all empathize with the message that there can be a them versus us culture sometimes, where there's a perception that those who carry out research are of higher esteem than those who just support. Interestingly, a finding of the survey was that sometimes this wasn't the case in individual research groups. RMA colleagues did feel like they were valued by the teams they worked directly with, but not necessarily valued for their contribution to research by their wider institution. The Wellcome Trust survey cast a light on psychological safety in research environments, really revealing concerns around precarity and an unhealthy mix of competition, bullying, and a lack of support for mental health. The data, in fact, showed that 60% of those surveyed had witnessed bullying, while 30% had experienced it. It's not all bad news, however. In the next 2 slides, I've included links to positive research culture initiatives, which you can explore in your own time. Concordats and charters can be useful tools for research culture change, as they force us as signatories to put together action plans, and they make us accountable in monitoring our progress against them. I'd like to highlight some of the positive initiatives I think are of direct relevance to PRISMs. Through the PRISM network, we've already seen impacts in the sector for the better, for example, the inclusion of PRISMs as CDT co-leads. Other research culture stories of interest include all the work technicians have done to improve recognition of their contributions to research, starting with the technician commitment and moving on to secure more and more funding to support professional development. The Thrive project at Liverpool is also interesting. It's exploring new models of research teams, and the findings they have so far seem to indicate that the role of a convener is key, and I think this is an area that PRISMs greatly contribute to. The Hidden Ref is also an interesting addition to the research culture landscape. It's an event that takes place in Bristol each year, and it's an opportunity to showcase contributions to research that aren't currently recognised through Ref. Finally, the credit system aims to improve the current research culture in research publishing, where being first author is sometimes everything. This taxonomy provides a space to include wider contributions of more authors, and some relevant areas for PRISMs could include funding acquisition, project administration, writing, reviewing, or editing. We've come to the end of the first section, and I hope this has been a useful overview of why we are talking about research culture and who is currently leading the discussion. Next, I would like to share how I got into research culture work and which aspects of my PRISM role I still use today in my current role as research culture manager. My background is in biomedical research, but it became clear during my PhD that while I was passionate about my project, I also enjoyed engaging with the wider research ecosystem. I particularly sought out opportunities for science communication, volunteering at museums and festivals, taking part in school outreach competitions. When the opportunity came for an internship in my second year, I jumped on the chance to join the Royal Society's Policy Centre, which only served to further my interest in the broader research context. So I voluntarily left the traditional academic research pathway after my PhD, and my first role was at Coventry University, working to support funded research projects in a research centre. The support we provided to projects was very rigorous and used Prince2 templates for things like project plans and risk registers, so I felt like I got a really good grounding in project management. I soon moved to Warwick, where I project managed a program of activities to increase collaboration between disciplines, which was called Bridging the Gaps, and I was fortunate that the PI at the time was supportive of using some of the budget to fund my training as a Prince2 practitioner. I've since then worked a short while in research development, picking up bid writing skills, and then moving on to a more senior PRISM role as a manager for a Network Plus, which was led by multiple institutions and aimed to bring together all academic, industry, and policy stakeholders in one area of research. A common theme with my PRISM and professional services roles is that would describe it as becoming a specialist and being a generalist. So being able to work with different disciplines and stakeholders and getting a feel for the different research cultures that exist within and beyond individual institutions. I think this aspect of PRISM roles, having to straddle the technical and operational, is particularly useful in my current research culture role, as well as the institutional knowledge I have gained from working in very different disciplines and contexts. This is a very busy slide, and ideally all days aren't as full as this, but I've tried to cover a variety of tasks that could be included in the role of a research culture manager. Some of the areas covered include improving recognition. So I've been involved in setting up our first celebration awards with categories including research enabler and research culture. This has been a team endeavour with many of others in the research office and other professional services across the university, which I think is one big difference compared to my previous PRISM roles. I feel a lot more embedded into the institution, but also my workload is a lot less predictable. A second area is tackling research culture issues. So I'm responsible for putting together and organising working groups around key challenges, including bullying and harassment, researcher training, and interdisciplinary research, to name a few. These aim to bring together key representatives, so PGRs, academics, professional service colleagues, HR. I'm responsible for collating actions and ensuring that the work of the group is in synergy with other aspects of the institution. I think the convening and facilitation skills required for this, making sure that all voices are heard and helping to steer the conversations productively, have been acquired in my PRISM roles. Another aspect is managing funding. So as with previous PRISM roles I've held, I'm currently responsible for running internal funding competitions, including the briefing sessions, bid writing advice for applicants, putting together the selection panel and providing feedback to those who are unsuccessful. I also program manage the 30 or so projects we funded this year, keeping track of plans and spending and aiming to find synergies across projects. Finally, a big part of my role is supporting institutional initiatives. So I've also recently taken on board line managing admin support for a new program of interdisciplinary research. And in this aspect of my role, I still use PRISM skills like being able to organize kickoff meetings, providing Gantt charts, and getting new teams to work together effectively. This is also my first experience of line management. In terms of other tasks, I'm also responsible for organizing events. And so some of the skills I've picked up as a PRISM, organising large conferences still come into play. Last year, I took on organising the first International Research Culture Conference, and this is now an event that we plan to hold every year. This includes managing the call for abstracts, inviting speakers, co-creating an exciting programme. And this is likely to be a change as we get closer to REF. We're still in the earlier days, but already feel a difference compared to my previous PRISM role is greater involvement with institutional priorities like REF, and that means a closer relationship with research leadership. Another aspect of this role is external collaboration. So a change from my previous PRISM roles is external visibility. So anyone with lived experience of research can become an expert in research culture, and through this role, I feel like I've been able to grow professionally, including setting up my own network and collaborating across the sector to discuss challenges and put together funding bids. I'm hoping, as a professional goal of mine, that this will put me on the path to conducting research again, but this time in the context of research on research, which has always been my fascination. If this overview of research culture work has been interesting rather than off-putting, I'm happy to chat with anyone interested in applying for research culture jobs, so please get in touch. I hope one message I've conveyed in this training is that there is no one-size-fits-all in research culture, and it's therefore important to establish key priorities in different contexts. A key enabler of my work at Warwick is that we have a useful way of framing research culture that works for us. It's our 5-adjective toolkit, which conveys what we are trying to do. So in order to create the best research environment for our researchers and research enablers, our initiatives aim to promote a research community that is happy, creative, and productive, and a research practice that is open and sound. We think that if you then break down any of these 5 adjectives, you can get to most areas of research culture. So for example, happy can be broken down to look at barriers to happiness like precarity or bullying and harassment. Creative can be broken down to look at disciplinary silos and what we can do to enable our teams to work together, and so on. In the previous slide, we started with what we want to achieve. A different way of developing a research culture strategy is to start with the challenges. As network lead for the Research Culture Enablers Network, I have condensed responses from our members, who represent collectively over 75 universities, to identify the top 10 research culture challenges we all share. This gives a starting point for our discussions, and the hope is that working together, we will come up with improvements for at least some of these. Certainly, through setting up the network, I've been able to make more connections, and I'm involved in developing research proposals for Priority 9, which is Research Enabler Empowerment. And if successful, I hope we'll see some positive research culture change for PRISMs. We've come to the end of section 2. The next section was interactive, and PRISMs attending the training were invited to contribute their own experiences and ideas. The first task was to reflect on their current research culture and to provide a 3-word summary, which you could see on the next slide. We noted the unhelpful duality of rigidity and inconsistency, but acknowledged that there was some good out there as well, with some using the words like supportive, energetic, and improving. It should come as no surprise then that ARMA's word cloud, where they asked members for the same 3 words to describe research culture, captures the positive as well as the negative. In the final part of the training, we invited PRISMs attending to work in breakout rooms, thinking firstly about how PRISMs are affected by their current research culture, and then flipping this to consider the more active roles PRISMs can play in improving research culture. You could find a link to the main discussion points generated by this interactive session in the resources for this course. We've now reached the end of the training. Thank you for viewing these slides, and please get in touch if you'd like to find out more.